How did an Alzheimer's patient go from the state veterans home in Boulder City to the psych ward at a Las Vegas hospital? And could it happen to you or your loved one? We'll tell you about it. Some 5 million Americans are said to have Alzheimer's disease, and with an aging population, that number is expected to double in the near future. With a high percentage of the population expected to have the disease, it's likely Alzheimer's will touch your family. So, what if you suddenly have no control over what happens to a loved one afflicted with Alzheimer's or other age-related dementia? In a moment, we'll talk to a woman who just went through that experience. But first, my producer Dana Gentry has some background.
When Patrick Healy's Alzheimer's progressed to the point his family could no longer care for him, they moved him to Sunrise Assisted Living Center, where he remained for 2 years. In April, thinking he could benefit from more intensive care, Healy's daughters transferred him to the Nevada Veterans Home in Boulder City. His medical records reveal usual behaviors for Alzheimer's patients. He wandered, he tried to leave. At times, he resisted care and said he was going home. Staff noted he was also cooperative and pleasant and enjoyed socializing with other residents. But after 2 weeks and an unexpected psychiatric evaluation, doctors doubled Healy's anti-anxiety medication and added a drug known to cause agitation. 3 days later, Healy was on his way to a psych ward on what's known as a legal 2000, a mandatory 72-hour hold, declared a danger to himself on one form, a danger to others on another. But Healy's daughter contends the state had no right to commit her father. Under state law, patients with dementia do not fit the definition of mentally ill and can only be committed if an eligible mental illness also contributes to the diminished capacity of the person. Thanks to misplaced paperwork, Healy's daughters were able to get their father out after one night in the psych ward.
That was Dana Gentry reporting. The Veterans Home Director, the State Department of Veterans Services, and the doctors involved declined to appear on this program. Desert Springs said legal concerns prevented hospital personnel from talking. The Vets Home says so far this year, 5 patients have been transferred to the psych ward at Desert Springs, and the Veterans Home stands by its right to commit Mr. Healy. Joining me, Mr. Healy's daughter, Judy Hendrickson, and his Alzheimer's doctor, Charles Bernick. He's from the Cleveland Clinic Lou Ruvo Center. Thanks to both of you for joining me. There are a lot of issues to talk about with this case. Medication, when people should be transferred, how acute this man's condition was. But first, let me ask you the obvious question. How's your dad doing right now?
My dad's doing very well right now.
Where is he now?
He's back at Sunrise, not in the assisted living. He's in the memory unit now at Sunrise.
Meaning what? What is the memory unit? Because a lot of this is going to be foreign to a lot of people. I want to try to educate people on what this is all about.
Okay, well, at Sunrise, they have 2 floors of assisted living where it's somebody that just needs help with everyday living issues. And the memory care is a little bit more hands-on. It's for people that might have difficulty eating, getting dressed, maybe going to the bathroom. They've forgotten how to do a certain number of
so it's kind of just a level up of care from the other one. I can't imagine what it's like to have a parent who has Alzheimer's, but yet go through that situation that's trying enough. And then essentially what happened to you, I don't know how to describe it. I want you to describe it. He essentially got lost in the system, became a nightmare for you. Talk about what that was like.
Well, what we did is the people at Sunrise had suggested that we move my dad into the memory care. And my sister and I and my brother and my husband all decided that maybe rather than move him to the memory care there, maybe it would be time to move him to the VA, where we thought they had more care available around the clock.
Your dad is a veteran?
Yes, my dad is a veteran of the Korean War. So we thought rather than move him twice, let's just move him once, because moving on Alzheimer's patients is very traumatic because they don't remember, and now all of a sudden you're changing what little they do remember of their environment. Now you're changing that again.
Well, let me just stop you for a second there because I want to bring the doctor and we'll give you plenty of time to tell the story. I read all the daily reports on Mr. Healy, and yes, of course, anyone going from one place to another, it's going to be a little bit disorienting, especially if you have Alzheimer's. But the descriptions there didn't strike me as if this guy was so out of control that he needed to be sent to a psych ward. What's your take on what happened there?
Well, Mr. Olson, you know, I'm not really familiar with exactly what happened. You know, I wasn't there.
But you treated him before he was there, correct?
Yeah, and I still do.
Right.
I mean, I think the thing is a commitment to a geropsych unit usually occurs if somebody's a threat to themselves or others. So that would be the criteria that would probably lead to being placed in a geriatric psychiatry unit.
But let's talk about how this process works. Again, it may be foreign to people. You're treating this man. They decide to put him first at the Sunrise Center and then over to the vet's home. Are you consulted by the doctors there? Because obviously you're familiar with this patient. Do they call you on a daily, weekly basis? How does it work?
Generally not. So
why is that?
Well,
that doesn't make sense to me. Again, I'm a layman, so explain.
I think you bring about a larger problem, which is communication just in medicine in general between when you have many specialists involved in a case, and that's I think a general problem. But no, I'm in a situation like that. Customarily, the physicians there do not call us. Some do, and will either get their own advice, as they did in this case, from a psychiatrist, or make decisions on their own. But I will say this is not a uniform process, and some physicians that have questions will call the specialist.
All right, I want to talk more about your assessment of Mr. Healy. I want to talk more about what happened inside this process when we come back right here on Face to Face. And later in the program, we're going to talk about cyber terror and what can happen in the new frontier of computers and the war against terror. Stick around. Welcome back across Nevada to Face to Face. A little later in the program, we're going to talk about cyber terror attacks and with an expert who's here in town. But first, we're talking about a woman's experience with the mental health care system involving her father, an Alzheimer's patient who was committed to a psych facility, and she got him out. We have his doctor here also today on the program. So Dr. Bernick mentioned that there was a psychiatrist who was brought in to see him, and I read those evaluations. On April 21st, which I believe was about 2 weeks after he got there, the psychiatrist seeing your father, Dr. Dodge Slagle, said here, in that report, the staff reports that he is resistant to care and has a menacing look about him, although he has never actually in any physical threats. He does often seem to be creating a world of his own. Now, 3 days later, the application to a mental health facility was made, said it was physically aggressive to staff. As the doctor mentioned, you have to be a threat to the staff or yourself. But there's no incident that I saw reported in there of him being that way. What do you know about that?
Well, I think as an Alzheimer's patient, every day is a new day, and there are some good days and there are some bad days. I did not see any behavior ever that my father exhibited that would warrant a trip to the psych ward. Keep in mind, you're at the VA home where they have physicians on staff, and if there is a behavior issue with a resident, that you can easily do an Ativan as needed. I think they have the ability right there to solve any issues. But again, I'm going to say I saw no issue with my father ever that warranted a trip to the psych ward. I think he exhibited ordinary, normal Alzheimer's type behavior.
Normal Alzheimer's type behavior. He wandered around, as Dana pointed out in her story. He's disoriented. He's not sure. Sometimes he couldn't find the bathroom, and he urinated in a garbage can. I would. That's all kind of normal. It's such thing as normal Alzheimer's behavior, right, doctor?
Well, I think behaviors like that are not unusual. And again, I think it was a new environment, and so you kind of expect some of that. But again, I would imagine that the trigger would be, again, some aggressive behavior or something like that would warrant actually going to the lengths of hospitalization.
I read through all the records, and I may have missed it, and we tried to get the hospital officials to talk about this, but there is no record of any incident. Yeah. Just saying he looked menacing at one time would not be enough, certainly, right? Correct?
Well, again, that's a judgment call. Wasn't there, but certainly I think if somebody's a threat to themselves or others, that's the criteria.
You know, it's interesting because Dana put up that law. I mean, there are laws saying when you can and can't do that. And I think some people might be confused. Dementia versus mental illness versus Alzheimer's. Aren't they all the same thing?
Well, I think we artificially divide it because in some sense the behaviors could be the same. So whether you're aggressive because you're schizophrenic or aggressive because you have Alzheimer's disease doesn't make much of a difference. I mean, you still need to be treated. And sometimes the medications we use are the same, whether it's a mental illness or a disease such as Alzheimer's disease.
I think you reconstructed some of these events, and I read some of the detail. You were definitely concerned about some of the medications they were putting him on, and at least once I think you said they didn't come directly to you to get approval to change his medication. Is that correct?
Right. I really do believe they were ratcheting up the medications unnecessarily.
Why would they be doing that?
I have my own opinions on that. I have no...
What are your opinions?
You know what? I think for them it was easier to have a patient sitting being very compliant and not up and wandering like my father was.
Does that happen, Dr. Bernick? I mean, some people have the images, of course, of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, right, where they give all the medication just to calm the patients down, so they'll just sit around and they'll be easier to take care of. Does that happen?
Absolutely.
It does.
No, it definitely happens. And, you know, sometimes it is necessary. I mean, there are some people that are so aggressive that they are, again, a threat to other people in the community. They're living in a community, and so you have to protect other people too. So, you know, there is a balance, and there's two sides to everything, but there's no question, you know, does over-medication occur? Absolutely.
When we come back, I want to talk about something else that came up in there besides the medications, and that is the so-called Legal 2000, which is putting a hold on him, and what happened with that, and how you were able to get your father out. Let's talk about that and when that's used. We'll be back to talk about this case, and later, cyber terror. We have an expert here to talk about that. Stick around. Welcome back across Nevada to Face to Face. In a while, we're going to talk about cyber terror. It's out there. It's real. We have an expert here in town to talk about it. But first, we're talking about a woman's experience in the mental health system with her father who has Alzheimer's, and his doctor is here too. Dana mentioned in her story this Legal 2000. Explain how often are these? This is essentially putting a hold on somebody, saying for 72 hours, I believe, you can't do anything. When does that happen?
Well, generally, it happens if somebody has, again, some type of a mental or psychiatric behavior that, again, puts them at risk.
An episode has to trigger this, doctor? Something like he's threatening somebody, or looks like he's a threat to himself?
Yes, that's right. And it allows the treating physicians to basically hold the patient and for evaluation against their will.
And so let's talk about what happened in your case. You found out about this how, and tell me what happened from there.
So we went to Desert Springs. My sister and I went to Desert Springs, and we went up to the 4th floor to take him home. And we got there, and the nurse informed us that we couldn't do that because they had put him into Desert Springs on a Legal 2000.
Which you've never heard of, I'm
I've
sure.
never heard of. And again, I hold healthcare power of attorney and power of attorney for my dad, and I've taken care of him for the past 6 years, 10 years for medical and such. So so I was just shocked, and I was stunned, and I had no idea.
Did the vet's home tell you about some incident that had occurred over there where he had...
They thought that on a Monday before they did that, my husband and I left, and he was a little agitated when we left. They had changed a medication that had a side effect of agitation, and he followed us out the door in a matter of minutes, and in his quest to get out, went down another hallway and out on a patio, and he jumped up on an 18-inch wall, which they considered climbing a fence, and so that was the event that precipitated them moving him to the psych ward the next day.
And so you get there, and they say you can't take him out, but eventually you were able to take him out within that 72-hour period?
Yes, I did. And
I don't understand how that could happen.
Once I realized that I was not getting him out that night, I went home and I started, I phone called the VA home. I told them to tell the social worker I was very upset at the way things unfolded, and started looking online about this statute. She had quoted this, Nevada revised statute with the mental illness and the Alzheimer's.
We're almost out of time, but isn't that very strange that she would have been allowed to take him home if he was put there in a Legal 2000, doctor?
Well, yeah, I just don't know the circumstances. Right. So but generally it is true. I think you need guardianship in some sense to make these decisions. Absolutely. But I just don't know about the specific case.
Right. Well, we're out of time. I wish you the best of luck with your father, and I hope things go better going forward. Dr. Bernick, always thanks for coming on the program. When we come back, we'll talk cyber terror with an expert who's here in town. Stick around. Welcome back across Nevada to Face to Face. Despite unprecedented federal spending on cybersecurity, our nation's infrastructure, defense, and financial systems remain vulnerable. Our guest tonight says current firewalls that keep infected software out while keeping protected information in may not be the answer. Joining me, the co-founder and CEO of Looking Glass Cyber Solutions. That's a company that defends against cyber terror. Derek Gabbard joins us. Welcome to the program,
Thanks
sir.
for having me.
So you are saying that this what's so-called castle and moat strategy, which you can imagine that you surround all the stuff inside there by this essentially cyber moat.
Right.
It doesn't work.
No, so the whole strategy kind of grew up back in the days when organizations owned all of the network equipment and infrastructure that mattered to them. And so over time that's kind of changed, and now with cloud computing and some of the new current buzzwords, that are actual real technologies, there's a movement of all that information and a movement of all that capability outside of the traditional perimeter security model. So now we have a very interconnected set of networks that are interdependent and rely on each other, and at the end of the day, a castle and moat strategy doesn't work there.
You know, essentially, when people you talk about the cloud, I'm sitting there on my computer. It used to be all this stuff was right inside my computer. Now I have all this information that's up there in the cloud, and it might be accessed more easily by people who know what they're doing, right?
That's right, and it's not just you. It's banks, it's defense contractors, it's large enterprises.
I only care.
I understand.
I'm kidding.
Most people do, but at the end of the day, you know, those organizations have used the same kind of technologies that you're talking about to push their data, to push their processing out to these providers, and now they're completely dependent upon the security of this ecosystem instead of just the security of their own internal infrastructure.
So what do you do?
So I think we're at the cusp of a new approach, which is to start looking at the network as it is, as a system of systems, and to start to push the defenses out to the providers, to push the defenses out into the cloud, if you will, and to look at it more as an ecosystem instead of just an individual castle and moat or perimeter model.
This goes both ways, and I'm sure you know all about this. The U.S. and Israel especially have used these viruses to go and try to screw up Iran's uranium enrichment system. In fact, they did one just earlier this week, and the Washington Post today wrote a story about it saying Iran's nuclear enrichment equipment was targeted just last month. The United States and Israel jointly developed what's called the Flame virus, which secretly mapped and monitored Iran's computer networks. The effort involving the National Security Agency, the CIA, and Israel's military has included the use of destructive software such as the Stuxnet virus to cause malfunctions in Iran's nuclear enrichment equipment, the reporters wrote. So imagine, imagine someone who wants to destroy the financial infrastructure of a country, and they're sophisticated enough to come up with one of these viruses. They don't have to get it inside your computer. They can get it up there into the cloud, right?
Yeah, that's definitely a possibility. So it does cut both ways. So defending against that means you have to be able to understand where all of your infrastructure that you depend upon sits, and to be able to start pushing some form of situational awareness, some form of threat intelligence, some form of mitigation out there. But by the same token, if there are organizations that need to exploit or look for weaknesses in adversary networks, they're unfortunately in the same kind of distributed computing and service provider environment that we are. So one leak into that type of organization, and now you have widespread effects.
I'm not usually in the business of scaring people. I don't want to scare people unnecessarily, but how much unsafe data is there out there, sir?
Well, it's not. So there's a lot. You know, the internet has some dark alleys and some bad places, and I think that we have kind of come to realize that in the past year or so. You know, my company's been working on this for a few years, actually over 5 now, and in the beginning we were we saw our customers be more interested in securing their own perimeter and their own infrastructure. And I think that mentality started changing 18 months to 2 years ago, and now they see security as a distributed responsibility. They're expecting it of their providers, they're expecting it of their partners, and as such, they're in turn raising the bar on each other.
You're just saying you can't, these people, these businesses, whatever they are, can't be as insular as they used to be, saying, I've just got my little place here. They have to work together with their vendors, with their business partners, et cetera.
That's right. Yeah, unfortunately and fortunately, the interconnectedness has driven down costs, but it's driven up exposure. And so at the end of the day, we are trying to help folks understand what that exposure is, understand what they can do to start mitigating that risk, and to hold each other accountable so that you have the ability to understand where your risks are and deal with them.
We're out of time. Fascinating stuff. Derek Gabbard, thanks for coming on the program to talk about it.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Finally tonight, there's some obscure sporting event going on in London, and this network insists on covering it at the time we usually come to you. So instead of watching the sport right here on Face to Face, you'll have to be content with the Olympics for a couple of weeks. Enjoy the action. We'll see you back here in a couple of weeks, and go USA!
News 3,